Welcome to Compound Insights, a podcast by CFA Society New York. I'm your host, Rob Rowan. Today we're talking about an exceptionally important topic in that tech stocks have been most of the growth for the investment markets for the last 18 months or so. We're here to talk about the future of tech stocks and their regulation. Jennifer Huddleston is an expert in this field. She is a senior fellow in technology policy at the Cato Institute. Her research focuses on the intersection of emerging technology and law. Jennifer has a JD from the University of Alabama Law School and a BA in political science from Wellesley College. So, welcome to the podcast.
Thanks for having me.
So, Jennifer, one item that has been left out of the typhoon of announcements that we've seen in the news over the last couple of months is where the FTC cases against the companies, particularly in the tech sector, are headed. And I'm referring to those that were started during Donald Trump's first term, those years ago. So, can you give us an idea where you see that going from here today?
Absolutely. And I think you're right that it's important that in all of the other exciting announcements, a lot of the excitement over AI and whatnot, that we have to remember this is a time that we've seen tech under a lot of scrutiny. And there are a lot of questions about what these cases could mean for the future of innovation, what they could mean for the future success of businesses of all sizes, as well as what they could mean for us as consumers. So we have seen cases filed against the four leading tech companies. So Meta, Apple, Google, and Amazon all have cases brought against them regarding antitrust. Some of these are brought by the Federal Trade Commission, and some of them are brought by the DOJ. The one that is probably the farthest along right now is a case involving Google, where we saw a ruling that Google had violated Section 2 of the Sherman Act as to its default search agreements with very specific kind of distribution platforms. It's important to note this was not as broad as it sometimes gets made in the headlines of Google as a monopoly in search. It was very much dealing with this one particular type of agreement. That case is now in its remedy phase, and we've seen a lot of debate about what those remedies could look like. We've seen the Department of Justice previously pushing that it might need to sell off Chrome, which really raises questions of does that remedy actually reflect what was at risk in the or what was found to be a violation in this case. And we also have seen that Google is likely to, of course, appeal this decision. And so this is far from over and illustrates how long these cases go on. Additionally, the Meta case, the case involving Facebook and Instagram, is likely to have its arguments in April. And so that is still ongoing and something that, as we sit here in March of 2025, that is directly on the horizon. And then we haven't seen any kind of signaling in this administration that would indicate that we are likely to see the cases against Amazon, against Apple, against Google, or against Meta dropped in any way. So it certainly seems like these are certainly things to watch, not only as they impact these large businesses, but also as they impact smaller businesses. What sort of chilling effect might this send to mergers and acquisitions more generally? And what might this mean for the end consumers? If we look back on something like the Microsoft case, which is often really held up as kind of the time that antitrust was necessary to intervene in the tech market, two things that I think are very significant to our current moment. First, by the time that case had been settled, it was largely that our technology had moved past what we were debating. It was about browser it was about browser wars and how we access the internet had changed.
Right,
But
like 5% of people were using Internet Explorer at that
right.
time.
But secondly, I think the other thing that's really important are statements that have been made since by Bill Gates and others about how Microsoft, in many ways, missed the moment in mobile because they were busy with the antitrust case and that there was this kind of chilling effect. So there's going to be this question that we may not know for decades down the road of what did we miss out on that could have been more competitive, could have been more innovative because we see resources or we see, a chilling effect in terms of what companies are perhaps willing to do. And we're seeing all this at a time where innovation is moving significantly forward in the AI space.
Right. Let me back up and unpack a little bit here. I think you made an excellent point at the beginning there that the Google case that is nearer the end than the beginning is actually quite different from the EU's case against Apple or Google also, which was much broader and a little bit different spot. The other ones will take years, and who knows how the businesses might change during that time. And as you say, it does stifle innovation, which is one of the things that's been pushing the market along, the stock market along. So this is why this matters for CFA charter holders who work in investment management because that's how we've been paying the bills for a while. So I would like to zero in on antitrust now cases a little bit because, and this is, exceptionally interesting to me. There has been a trend towards macroeconomic professor back in college used to call the oligopolization of subsectors. Um, there seems to be a decent number of oligopolies in some of the subsectors in recent years. So, do you think that antitrust legislation will evolve from here to address those?
Antitrust is a very powerful tool, and it's designed to be a tool that focuses on when we see anti competitive behaviors in the market that are negatively harming consumers. I think there's often this confusion that big companies should automatically be suspect, that antitrust is designed to prevent a single company being a leader in a market, or that there's some kind of arbitrary number of companies that are going to be the correct number in the market. That's actually very concerning because if we start to see a focus on competitors rather than consumers, then consumers could be harmed in the process. This is somewhat of the distinction in many ways between the American approach to antitrust and the European approach to antitrust, which has been much more focused on competitors than consumers, and that we've seen some of the impact of that in terms of certain products not being launched in Europe because of concerns of what it might mean under the Digital Markets Act. We've also seen the potential impact of that in terms of what could happen if you quit focusing on the consumers and you instead set this kind of idea that big is automatically bad. I think the other element here is that, particularly in the tech sector, a lot of these debates really hinge on market definition of how we're seeing these markets actually play out. We saw this to some degree in the Google case of the question of when we're talking about search, is social media search, things like TikTok or YouTube, or specialized search where people go to Amazon for products or to TripAdvisor for travel reviews, a competitor, let alone things like how AI may fundamentally change the way we do search. So you're seeing a lot of debate over market definition, where oftentimes the government is trying to very narrowly define the market to be something that only this company could really exist in, whereas the actual consumer experience may be broader than that. I think the other thing that's important to remember, particularly in the tech sector, is there's a difference in someone that's a first mover and someone that's an anti-competitive monopoly. And the reason that that's really important is when we look at things like the debate over AI, you have something that's often very costly to get going. And so it's not surprising that you see one first mover, and then because there is a market response, ideally what you see is others try and rise to that challenge. So you may see an early adopter seem like they have a large market share, but in a few years, we may look back and that may still be a leading player, or you may have seen someone who is farther down the stack. The other thing that's important to recognize is this is an ecosystem. So when we're looking at the competition in the tech sector, there are many different levels, whether we're looking at the internet stack or whether we're looking at the AI stack, where we're seeing competition between large players and small players. We're seeing different kind of relationships evolve, as well as those that may benefit consumers. So I do think that we still have a very robust and competitive ecosystem, both when it comes to the internet as well as when it comes to emerging technologies like AI, and that in many cases, some of our problem is how we choose to look at these things. So with AI, we're trying to make predictions very early in the market. And that if we see government intervene in that, it may actually derail the market and derail competition to some degree. With the internet, oftentimes we're looking at only what our mind can imagine. We're looking for that next Google, that next traditional search engine, when the reality is how we choose to perform search is changing completely. Same thing with social media, same thing with many of the other debates that we've had, whether it's around messages and blue bubbles, green bubbles, or whether it's around, Amazon and what retail competition looks like. I think at times it's important to take that step back and recognize how, in our own experiences, these markets are already perhaps more diverse than we may just think in that initial moment.
Yeah, this is, I mean, let me just unpack that a little because you said quite a few exceptionally interesting things there. So let me just circle back to that. One of the things that I think is exceptionally interesting is to think about this with an eye towards the consumer, which is very difficult because people use the internet for very different things. The the other thing that I think is exceptionally interesting about this is to think about how AI policy seems to evolve, because in many ways it is exceptionally similar to the beginning of search. People say now, you say you have to be careful about how you prompt the AI, but people back then would say you have to be careful how you Google stuff. We, we had to learn how to Google stuff. Now we have to learn how to prompt things, and you can see the evolution coming along that way. So, are you confident that there will be management of the AI? Let me back up to one thing also. You said something very earlier, very important also, that there is this massive expenditure on research and development of AI tools, but boy, did the air get taken out of that a couple months ago. So that was a significantly lower price tag, as it turns out. But this doesn't really belie the idea that there's a long-term view is exceptionally helpful in managing the evolution of this of AI so that it doesn't come to fruition where it destroys a lot of jobs or raises a lot of job requirements or creates a lot of copyright issues. Could you talk a little bit to that, please?
So the reality is we've been using AI much longer than many of us realize. If you've used autocomplete on an email, if you've interacted with a chatbot, when trying to do a return to a store, if you've, used one of those mapping apps that kind of auto programs based on real-time data the fastest route, we've actually been using AI in ways that we no longer think of as AI. So I always like to mention that because I think it helps alleviate some of that initial panic. For many of us, this is the first true disruptive technology, this first true general purpose technology that we're encountering in the workplace, and we're having to learn how to adapt to that. The good news is if we look at history, we're remarkably good at adapting to these new technologies. And that's not to say there won't be job displacement. That's not to say that there won't be a lot of questions around copyright or around how it's used, particularly in licensed professions or things like that, how much you're allowed to rely on it. But most of those are going to be societal questions or questions within a specific profession around norms and ethics as opposed to things that need to be handled at a top-down policy level. And we dealt with this with things like the internet, we dealt with this with things like Excel, we dealt with this with things like ATMs. So that's all to say that, we have seen this before. We will most likely in these cases be able to develop societal norms around the use of the technology, and that we have to not only consider those worst case scenarios, but also those best case scenarios. The fact that we'll be able to allow more people more access to information to help themselves. The fact that in many cases, AI may be able to assist us in ways that the internet does in finding the right resources or in helping improve our communication with each other, or even just in terms of simple tasks like taking a picture of a recipe and having it take into account dietary restrictions or having it give you the calories in it or things like that. Then
Or
when we
the
start
or the
to
things that you already have in your
right,
kitchen.
exactly what you already have, what can you substitute with what you already
Right.
have? There are a lot of really simple ways that it's going to get easily incorporated into our lives as well. And we tend to focus on these kind of catastrophic worst case scenarios in many cases. And if we only focus on the worst case scenario, we may accidentally eliminate the best case scenario in the process.
Yeah, I mean, I think there was an exceptionally interesting historical report done by the Economist Intelligence Unit a couple of years ago that showed that every innovation, starting with the cotton gin till the most recent one that had come around back then, did create more jobs than it destroyed. However, those jobs did come at higher skill sets. So stay in school, basically. Keep getting CFAs. That helps you. So, I just want to go back to sort of the state of the tech industry as it is right now. Are you confident that all these cases are going to go forward? What is your sense as a person in DC with your finger on the pulse? Do you think this is all these cases are going to keep going, or do you think the current administration is going to add some to it, or what do you think is next up here?
So we have seen in kind of early indications that there does not seem to be a desire in this administration to drop any of these cases. They were certainly, most of them were brought in the prior Trump administration, although not all of them. Of course, the Apple case, for example, while the investigation started under the prior Trump administration, the actual case was brought under the Biden administration. But when it comes to the pursuing of the cases, I think in terms of what theories you see brought forward may vary a little bit, as well as, how much excitement or how many resources are put into specific cases may vary. But we have seen, particularly from some folks, including Vice President Vance, some criticism of the tech industry and particularly of these leading tech companies that would seem to indicate that it's unlikely that these cases would be abandoned, and we can also look at that with the kind of statements that were made in Gail Slater's nomination hearing around being Assistant Attorney General for Antitrust, and some of what we've seen from FTC Chair Ferguson, as well as FTC nominee Mark Meader, that would indicate that there's likely to, particularly in the tech sectors, continue to be some degree of aggressive antitrust enforcement. That being said, I do think there are some areas where we may see some deviations, or there's some uncertainty about whether or not this will be as broad of a aggressive antitrust approach, or if it will be more narrowly focused on specific companies that may be politically disfavored. So, for example, there had been some rumblings around potential antitrust in AI. It seems like that would be a bit less likely, given that we saw the Biden era AI EO revoked, that there's been a lot of statements about the need to have American leadership in AI and kind of engaging in an antitrust investigation against the leading American companies in AI would seem counterintuitive to that. And then I think probably the big question has been what will be the approach toward how much scrutiny will mergers and acquisitions be under in this particular administration, and particularly in the tech sector, where that's often critical in various ways, both in terms of exit strategies for small companies, in terms of the way talent moves around, products move around, products get expanded to consumers. On the one hand, it seems like there might be less scrutiny of kind of mergers and acquisitions. On the other hand, we did see the FTC say they are going to continue the merger guidelines that were passed under the last administration. So that would certainly be kind of one of the things I'm watching outside of the cases is what happens, the first time that we see that headline making acquisition announced. Do we see kind of it immediately followed by FTC scrutiny the way that we saw previously, or have we seen kind of a more of an awareness of how important mergers and acquisitions are in the tech ecosystem and to consumers at the end of the day, who are the ones that antitrust is designed to actually benefit?
Yeah, that's a great point to end on because that is an exceptionally important part of the activity in the stock market that affects people's portfolios, also from their 401ks onto their separate accounts and the ones that are managed by the folks who are listening to this podcast. So great place to great place to hang that. So, thank you, Jennifer, for being on CFA New York's podcast.
Thank you for having me.
And thank you all to listening. So if you'd like to read more about Jennifer, you can find her on Cato's website. You can also find her on YouTube. She did a really interesting interview that was sort of related to this on Bloomberg last week, so you can get it from there now. So until next time, I'm Rob Rowan, and this has been Compound Insights.